in the Mishnah. Then the Gemara said yesterday that the custom of the house of Rabbi Gamliel was that they gave white clothing to the cleaners 3 days before Shabbat. But when it came to giving colored clothing, they gave the colored clothing a day before Shabbat, right? Even on Friday, because we said that colored clothing does not require as much time in the cleaners like white clothing. And again, this was a stringency because Beitilo says, as long as you give it to him before Shabbat, but if he does it on Shabbat, that's his business. It's not your business that he does it on Shabbat. You're not telling him to do it on Shabbat. He doesn't have to do it on Shabbat. You're not hiring him for Shabbat. But they were strict, like Beishamai's opinion. And the Gemara said, we see from here that white clothes is harder to wash than um, than colored clothing. And obviously, you can ask the question: what is the Gemara telling us this lesson? I mean, the Gemara is not here to tell us that how clothing works in laundromats. That it takes a longer amount of time to wash white clothing than colored clothing. Obviously, there's halachic ramifications. So maybe we could see that if a person goes ahead and charges you, and let's say a price of colored clothing and white clothing, and for the same, if they want to charge you the same, or they say the price is higher for something for white clothing over colored clothing, it's not that the person is cheating you in a sense, so to speak. And maybe that's perhaps a lesson, because we'll see the Gemara is going to say, Abaye have a yovle who moned the tzvila katra. Abaye gave a colored garment to a laundromat. Amalei, and Abaye said to the laundryman, because Kama boyis iluvay, how much money? We are in 19A, the art school. It's 19A 4. So he said, how much money is it for this garment? And the laundry guy said, Amalei kidachivara, the same price that you pay for white clothing is the same price that you pay for colored clothing. So he said back to him, Amalei, Abaye said, that's not a truthful type of thing. He says, Kvor kadamach rabbanan, the rabbis already taught us that colored garments are much easier to launder than white garments. And therefore, your price needs to be less, so to speak. Meaning that it sounds like maybe you're taking advantage, or that you're taking advantage of charging the same. You want to say it's the same price, when really it's not. It's not proper. It's not, doesn't make sense that it should be the same price. Abaye says, Haiman deyov mona lekatra. So Abaye tells us, when you give a garment to the laundromat, to the cleaners to be cleaned, you should measure the garment when you give it to the laundromat. Measure the length of the garment, the width of the garment. When you give it in, and when you take it back from him, when you pick up your garment from the laundromat, measure it again. The itfei, because if the garment is longer than it was, that means it was stretched out through the process of the cleaning process. So that is a bad sign. That means he did not do a good job. The itfei afsadeh, it's damage to the garment, the matche, because he stretched out the garment. The bitzir, And if the garment is less in size, if it's shrunk, then after day also he has damaged the garment, the kafse, because he has, now the garment has shrunk. Now, so the question, obviously, it would sound like that if you could prove, most probably, that the guy didn't do a good job, it would sound like maybe you could affect how much you pay him or what do you pay him. Do you pay him for the job he actually damaged the garment? The Gemara doesn't go into the details of this specific what will be the case. Can you go ahead and say, you owe me damages? Obviously, that's different Gemaras that will deal with that. But here you're protecting yourself, Abaye says, and it's important to know for a person to protect himself, protect your clothing. Number one, I think, if the more you have to spend on clothing, what is Mr. Haber? If you're going to have to spend more on clothing, what will happen as a result of that is that you're going to have less time, more time to work and less time to learn, so to speak. And that's a very big ramification, of course. And other ramifications, you have to protect your money, protect your garments. Someone's not doing good morning, thank you. Someone's not doing a good job. You gotta, you don't want to be using someone who's going to be ruining your garments. Or you could actually tell the person, and maybe now he'll know that he's ruining your garment, and therefore he'll do the laundry in a better fashion. Okay, Mishavin Elu ve'elu. So we said that Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel both agree that you could place beams on your olives or on your grapes that were already crushed before Shabbat. And what you're doing is, morning, Simon. Simon, would you mind, maybe Mr. Haber would want a coffee? Would you mind? And make a coffee for yourself also. Thank you very much, Simon. You can hear from the outside, right? Okay, so I will talk loud so you won't miss out. Um, so it says that one of the malachot on Shabbat is threshing. Threshing is by separating the product from the you know from the bad part, so to speak, and you get the seed out from the grain, from the kernel. So you go ahead and from the chaff you remove
Shaft.
how do I pronounce it? Chaff. Thank you. And that's dush. That's threshing, separating the seed from the chaff.
Shaft.
Okay, we'll get it that way. Okay, we'll have Nathan say it for us. And and if you squeeze a grape or you squeeze an olive, you're removing the liquid. That's part of that's a tolda. That's a part of that malacha of what is Simon. No, that's for you, Simon.
It's for you.
Thank you very much.
Water.
That's part of the malacha of it's under the category. It's a subcategory of the malacha of threshing. So that is now in our case. What did you do? You didn't do it on Shabbat. You didn't squeeze the grape or the olive on Shabbat. Before Shabbat, Dave, would you want to talk to me about who you share a little bit? Yeah, no problem. We have a little, okay. Yeah. So you didn't do this on Shabbat. That would be a big malacha, big sin. Before Shabbat, you squeeze the grapes, you press the grapes and the olives. And then before Shabbat, you place the beam on the olive and the grapes to quicken, to hasten, if that's the right word, Mr. Hasten. Okay, we'll get there one day, Nathan. To hasten the process of the liquid, haste, okay? Right. To quicken the process of the removal of the liquid. So without you putting the beam on, the liquid is coming out anyways. What you're doing is you're speeding up the process by putting the beam on before Shabbat. And speeding up the process, putting the beam on before Shabbat, you're allowed to do it even by Shammai, who says that your utensils have to rest on Shabbat. Your utensils are not allowed to do malacha on Shabbat. Beis Shammai holds that's called shvitat kelim. Good morning, Asaf. Beis Shammai would agree in this case it's not a problem that your beam is so to speak working for you on Shabbat and pushing out. It's pushing out. You're not doing it on Shabbat. You place the beam before Shabbat, right, Simon? But it's still happening on Shabbat. The Gemara says, what is the reason why Beis Shammai doesn't have a concern? The Gemara says, Maishna, it's together with your beam, right? Okay. So the Gemara asks the question. Let's see how the Gemara addresses the question. The Gemara says, Maishna, the Kula goes over Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai made all these gzerot in the Mishnah. The Beis Shammai says you can't do, in the Mishnah stated, you can't give to the laundromat, you can't go ahead and have your ink, if you put the ink before Shabbat into you put it into the pot, and that's gonna and the ink is gonna go ahead and take hold on Shabbat, or your garment. You put your garment in you want to dye your garment, and you put it in before Shabbat, and on Shabbat it happens. Beis Shammai says it's a problem, and here Beis Shammai says that there's no problem here if you put the beam on before Shabbat. Why doesn't he make a sim? Why isn't he concerned?
There's a difference between grape juice that's containing grapes or olives containing olives that is leaving and was going to leave anyway, and putting a dye into a pot, which is going to change the nature of the garment or the color of the garments. And was not going to happen anyway. You had to put it in there to get it to happen. So I think there's two very big differences in the case.
Okay, so we're going to see. Right, so we're going to see how the Gemara is going to make its distinction between this case and the other case. So Nathan is saying that there's a difference between putting a dye or something into before Shabbat, a garment into that dye, and actually the dyeing process is is happening now on Shabbat, but it's happening but here you're saying without him, it would happen anyways. No, I'm saying, but in case for the beam, you're saying because without the beam, the liquid is still coming out, right? Okay, so the Gemara is gonna say that. Okay, so look at the Gemara is going to answer, but before we get to the answer of the Gemara, the question is the language of the Gemara. The Gemara says, what is the difference? Why is this different than all the rest cases of the Mishnah? Maisha Kulu, that in all those cases, the Gozri Behu Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai made a Gezerah. Beis Shammai made a decree, which sounds like a rabbinic law. When you say a language of decree, the Gozu, like Gozu Be Rabbanan, the rabbis made a decree, protection. But those cases of the Mishnah, let's say the dye, and your pot, let's say you have your boiling pot, you have your boiling pot of liquid, which you have the dye in it, and you place the garment right before Shabbat in the pot.
But if it's boiling, you may even be tempted to stoke the coals also, unlike the beam where you're not tempted to do anything.
Right, but let's say the Gemara said, let's say the pot was even off the fire, and there's no problem stoking the coals, but there's a problem. Your utensils have to rest, and your utensils are now doing the dyeing on Shabbat. Now, is that a gzera, or that is a total law according to Beis Shammai of shvitat kelim, that your utensils need to rest? So why are we calling it a gezerah? Why is it being called a decree? Beis Shammai's law is not a decree. The Gemara brought a pasuk.
It wouldn't have happened without the pot yet containing the dye. In the case of the olives and the grapes,
It's happening with right. But before we get to that, Nathan, the question is, the commentary is this. It's rabbinical biblical. According to Beishami, the Gemara report a drasha that says that shvitat kelim, that your utensils, the Beishami understands, it would seem to be a biblical law according to Beishami, your utensils have to rest on Shabbat. So why does the Gemara refer to it as a gezerah? So I saw different answers to the question. So what I want to share the Ritva's answer, one of the Ritva's answer, his own answer. It's true that your utensils resting on Shabbat is a biblical law according to Beis Shammai. But sometimes the Torah itself creates biblical law to protect other biblical laws. For example, the Torah says 7 days you can't have chametz in your house on Pesach. You can't own chametz on Pesach. And the Torah gives a reason. Ki, anybody who eats chametz gets karet. So the Tziv says, so the Torah itself is creating a fence. The Torah is saying, don't have chametz in your house, don't own chametz, because if you do own chametz, we're afraid you might come to eat the chametz. It's like the guy, if you want to be on a good diet, anyone wants to be on a good diet, don't have cake in the house. Because if you don't have cake in the house, but if you have cake in the house, you might come to eat it. So right? Am I correct? So the Torah itself creates the fence. No chametz in your house. Now, if you have chametz in your house, you don't get karesh for having chametz in your house. Karesh getting cut off in the next row is for eating chametz. But the Torah gives you a lower level prohibition, a fence, say don't have the chametz in the house to protect from that. According to the Rambam, Maimonides, I would give another example of the Torah. The Rambam holds if when a woman is a nidah, when a woman has her period, if a man is physical with her, shows a physical affection, hugs her, kisses her, holds her hand, when she's a nidah, the Rambam holds that's a biblical prohibition. Now, if a person is intimate with a nidah, there's karet. That's cut off from the next world if he has relation with the nidah. But the pasuk says lo sikruvu, don't get close, legalot erva, that will lead to reveal, to actually do that will lead to that sin of having relations with her. So it would seem to me, now the Rambam says if a person is physical, hugs, kisses a nidah, there's malkut, lashes. If he sleeps with the nidah, there's karet, right? So we see a similar thing. The Torah creates a fence. The Torah creates the fence. The Torah says, don't be physical with the nidah. Why? Because that will lead to the next level. So, what did you say? Okay. So therefore, that's the story over here. Perhaps they're all gezerah. What does it mean? The gazru, that the gezerah is because of the Torah is making the gezerah. The gazru, the Rishami, because the gezerah there, right there, the Torah makes a fence. The Torah made its own fence. And what's the fence? That you shouldn't come to do the malacha yourself. Meaning, if you have your utensils working for you doing the malacha, doing the work on Shabbat for you, what are we concerned about? If your utensils are doing or creating the malacha on Shabbat, the next thing will happen is you will do it. If you could make something, you could dye something on Shabbat through your Shabbat, through your utensils, you know what's going to happen? You might come to say, I'll do it myself too. The bottom line is happening, right? If the malacha is being done, if the action is being done through utensils, that means you created that dye. The dyeing happened. You put it in right before Shabbat. You put the wool into the dye, and into the boiling pot, and now it catches on Shabbat. So if you're going to go ahead and allow that to happen, you might come to do it yourself directly. By the way, and that's before the Torah is creating its own fence. And again, what will be the fence? If a person himself does the malacha, it's a capital punishment as the penalty. The Torah gave a fence, don't have your utensils. Utensils is not you. It's not the same level. It's more of a fence. And by the way, I think the Rambam says on Shabbat, I'm not, there's something called Amir Lakum. I can't just tell my guy to do everything for me on Shabbat, right? It's not like I have a guy come to my house for Shabbat and anything I need, open the light, open the air conditioner, do this for me, do that for me. Why can't, meaning technically, on a Torah level, there's no problem for him to do all those things for me. Why did the rabbi say I can't have him do everything for me? Because if I get used to him doing for me, what will happen? If he's not there, I might come to do it myself. So therefore, the rabbis created that fence. So that is one of the answers of the Ritva of why the Gemara uses Maishna Kula de Gozri Buhu. The Gozri Buhu does not mean the rabbis made a fence, rather the Torah made a fence to protect. So what's the difference between this case of the beams on the crushed olives, if I put it on before Shabbat, and now the squeezing is happening through the beams on Shabbat. There's more oil and there's more wine coming out on Shabbat. Maishna, the Gemara says. Maishna, the Kula goes to Beishamai. Maishna korot Beit Habad Goliath. Got the Logozo. They didn't make a Gezerah. So the Gemara says like this, which in essence is going to be what Nathan says, but the Gemara uses different words, but I think it's the same thing. Here's the Gemara, Nathan. Hanach the Avadu b'Shabbat mechayev chata. These, if you would have done this actual act on Shabbat, if you would have go ahead and placed the wool into the boiling pot to catch the dye on Shabbat, it would have been a biblical prohibition. So therefore, we say that you can't do. That you can't do. You can't do that before Shabbat, because if you do that before Shabbat, we're afraid maybe you're going to come that you're going to come to do it on Shabbat. So therefore, there was a gzeira, there's a fence to protect the violation of doing a malacha on Shabbat. So therefore, because we say don't do this before Shabbat, because we're afraid if you do this before Shabbat, you might come to do it on Shabbat itself. And if you do this on Shabbat itself, you would go ahead and you would be violating the Shabbat. However, Chora Beit Habad. So let's see the language. Hanach the Avlu b'Shabbat mechayev chatat. These, if you had done it on Shabbat, you would be violated. You would be chayev chatat, meaning you would have to bring a sin offering if you would do it unintentionally, not knowing that I'm not allowed to do it. You'd be chayev chatat, a sin offering. Gozibuhu b'Shamai erev Shabbat v'chashecha. So in those cases, Beishamai said, you know what? Don't do it right before Shabbat. If you do it before Shabbat, we're afraid you're going to do it on Shabbat, and then there'll be a biblical violation. However, Korot Beit Habad, Vigule Hagat, this placing of the beams on the olives and on the grapes, right? You place the beams on the olives on the grapes before Shabbat. What are you concerned? He might come to place the olives and the beams on the grapes on Shabbat. Even if you would place it on Shabbat, there will not be a biblical violation, because since it already was coming out, since you already crushed it before Shabbat, therefore speeding up the process is not going to create. Is not a biblical violation of schita on Shabbat. So that's what the Gemara says. The Iyavalu b'Shabbat, if you actually place the boards on Shabbat, lo mechayev chatat, you would not be obligated a chatat. Lo gozi, the rabbis did not make gzeira. Okay, now the Gemara says, Man Tana. Who is the Tana of our Mishnah? We're now on 19a5. Man Tana on the right side of the page. Man Tana, who is the author? The Chomidi de Atei Memela Shapedami. There's there's no biblical prohibition to squeeze out the fruits when the liquid would come out by itself, right? We're saying now, like Nathan was saying, that once you crush the olives before Shabbat,
The oil or juice coming out was
inevitable, it's coming out at its own pace, maybe at a slow pace. So if at that point, if you would actually squeeze it at that point, there would not be any Torah violation. Even though at the end of the day, you are squeezing out liquid and you are speeding up the process, but nevertheless, we say that's not called a Torah prohibition because it's already been squeezed and it's coming out anyways. So that's not called warning Adam. That would not be the Torah prohibition. So who is that opinion? Omar, and you're saying even Beis Shammai would agree to that it would not be any biblical prohibition. And because there won't be any biblical prohibition, Beis Shammai would allow you to place the boards and the beams on it before Shabbat, even though it's continuous, the process is happening, continuing on Shabbat. We are on 19A 5, the right corner, bottom corner. So the Gemara, you're coming at a good point. Anytime becomes a good point. And the point of the Gemara is we have the Mishnah said a chidush. The Mishnah said that even though Beis Shammai is strict in all different situations before Shabbat, not to do certain things on Shabbat that will continue on Shabbat, but he allows you and him to place the boards on the grapes and the olives that you already pressed, you already crushed before Shabbat. You can place those boards, those olives on it, even though you are quickening the process of the squeezing of the thing that's coming out on Shabbat. But if you would actually squeeze it on Shabbat after you crushed it before Shabbat, there's no biblical violation of squeezing those olives and grapes that already have been crushed before Shabbat. Even though you're getting out, so to speak, it seems like you're getting out more, you're quickening it. The liquid is coming out at its own pace. You squeezing it subsequently after it was already crushed before Shabbat is not the biblical prohibition. You take a grape, you take an olive that was not crushed before Shabbat, you squeeze it on Shabbat, that is a melacha, that's an act of work, that's like it's similar to threshing, separating the good part from the bad part. That's called separating, and therefore you can't do that type of work on Shabbat. Shabbat is a day of rest. You don't do this type of food processing. You don't bake on Shabbat. You don't harvest on Shabbat. You don't thresh. Threshing is one of the malachot, and this squeezing out the grapes with the olive is a subcategory we call the tolda, the baby, the child of related to threshing. So that I can't take my grapes on Shabbat. I can't take my olives on Shabbat, and I want to have grape juice. I want to make grape juice on Shabbat, and I take grapes and I squeeze it into this cup, and now I got some grape juice for wine for kiddush. I can't do that. That's not acceptable because I'm doing a malacha. That is a biblical violation, taking grapes and squeezing it on Shabbat. But if I crush the grape before Shabbat, if I would now go ahead and then crush it again on Shabbat, that would not be a biblical violation. Maybe it might be rabbinic, and therefore the Mishnah states if I put the board on it before Shabbat, after I crushed it, everybody would agree it's not I can leave it like that. And even though it's coming out on Shabbat, I didn't do anything on Shabbat. I did everything before Shabbat. So the Gemara wants to know who is the opinion that says Man tana dechol midei da'atei memayla. Anything, if you have a fruit, if you have an olive or grape that was already crushed before Shabbat, and the liquid is coming out on its own, I'm allowed, the Torah will not forbade me to subsequently crush it once it's already been crushed. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina Rabbi Shmoli. He says the author of the Mishnah, of our Mishnah, is Rabbi Yishmael. That's not. We learned in a Mishnah, Hashum va botzer. Shum is garlic, very good, and botzer is grapes that weren't ripened properly, and they came off the tree or they came off the vine early. V'hamlilot, also ears of grain that did not ripen properly. And the custom used to be, people used to go ahead and use the liquid that from the unripened grapes as a dip. They would dip meat into the liquid of, we all know, I think, wine, people use wine, and, the chefs use wine in there. The wine gives a very good flavor to meat. And therefore, that's one of the problems you got to watch out. In certain stores, they don't have a proper mashgiach on top of things. They could be using wine, that's wine that's not that for flavoring, which is not kosher wine. So they would use as for dipping meat into this, maybe sour wine. No, not it wasn't well marinated because the wine wasn't properly ripened yet. It was grapes that came that didn't reach its full growth. But people would use it. Similarly, they would use the juice that would come out of the garlic, and they would use the juice, I presume, also for dips, and the juice from the ears of wheat that did not ripen properly. They also would use it. So if they have these items that were sheriskan mibodio, and you crushed it before Shabbat, you crushed the garlic before Shabbat, and you crushed these unripened grapes before Shabbat. Okay, now and then what you do, and you before Shabbat, you after you crushed it, you put some heavy weight on top of it, just like the case of the Mishnah, when you put the beams or the boards on top of the grapes or the olive that were already crushed before Shabbat, and then you after that you put the beam on it before Shabbat. So Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Yigma Mishetach Shach. Rabbi Yishmael says there's no problem. You could leave. You can leave um, the garlic, the unripened grapes under the boards, and the boards are pushing out more liquid from these grapes, and more liquid from the garlic. It's not a problem. However, so we see from here now the question is, so why isn't he concerned? So some learn that this price this mission is going according to Beis Shammai, and if according to Beis Shammai says you tend to have to rest on Shabbat, but your board is on top of the garlic and it's pushing out more juice, and you started that process before Shabbat, but it's still doing work for you on Shabbat. So the reason why you're allowed to do it would seem to be because even if I would go ahead and actually place the board on Shabbat on top of the garlic, it would not be a biblical prohibition because once it's already crushed before Shabbat and it's coming out on its own, the next me going ahead and quickening the process, doing another squeeze on Shabbat directly would not be a biblical prohibition. So that's what the Gemara wants to say. Rabbi Yishmael is the author. We see that he holds that once it's been crushed before Shabbat, there would not be a biblical prohibition if you would actually recrush it on Shabbat itself. And because there would be a biblical prohibition, therefore he allows you to have your utensil, so to speak, work for you. The only time Rabbi Shammai said the utensil can't be working for you doing an act of work if it's doing a malacha, if it's doing an actual Torah, something that if you do this act on Shabbat itself, right, if you would actually place the wool and the dye on Shabbat, there would be a biblical prohibition. So if you place this wool and the dye before Shabbat, we're going to say your utensil is working for you. But however, if you would actually squeeze the garlic on Shabbat, there would not be the biblical prohibition because you already squeezed it before Shabbat. That's why he allows you to continue the process and leave the board on it from before Shabbat. And it's not called your utensils working for you because it's not doing an act that will be a biblical prohibition of squeezing on Shabbat. Now, Rabbi Akiva Omer lo yigmar. Rabbi Akiva says no, you cannot leave that process. You cannot take the unripened grape or the garlic or the ear of wheat that was unripened and crush it before Shabbat and then leave the board on it before Shabbat to squeeze out the remaining liquid, because your utensil is not resting on Shabbat, because your utensil is doing a malacha. Your utensil, by keeping the heavy board on top of the grape from before Shabbat continuously on Shabbat, it's squeezing out the liquid, and that is a malacha. That is you are threshing. You're going to ask the question, what do you mean you're threshing? You already crushed it before Shabbat. So this opinion holds that even if you crushed it before Shabbat, a subsequent crushing is considered a act of work. It would be a biblical prohibition. So therefore, he says you can't do it. The first opinion says that once it was crushed before Shabbat, now subsequent crushing is not the biblical prohibition. Why not? Because without the subsequent crushing, as Nathan said before, it will come out by itself. But you crushed it, so now there's like a hole in the grape. There's a hole in the garlic, so it is oozing out. You're just quickening the process. That's not a biblical prohibition, but quickening process. Okay, so these are some of the laws that we'll see. We'll continue tomorrow, and on Shabbat, people have to think about realizing, you don't squeeze your grape into the cup to make grape juice. Have a great day, everybody. All the best. We should have a beautiful davening today. That beautiful davening, beautiful prayer. All the best.
Amen.
Ronnie, great to see you. Asaf, all the best. Got the light there. We're good. I did not close the.
Okay.
There's a meeting.
Yeah.